Welcome to the Green Room. I'm your host, Jeff Farragher, and tonight we have a very special episode where we'll get a glimpse into the unique world of the percussion section. Before we do, we'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors, the BC Arts Council, as well as Columbia Basin Trust, for their ongoing support of the symphony. We also want to thank you, our audience, for supporting us both on and off the stage. After tonight's presentation, join us for a live Zoom conversation where you'll get to meet our guests, ask them questions, and be part of the conversation. Just click on the link below in the description to join us immediately following the live premiere of this presentation. Also, don't forget to subscribe and like this video as well as share it so that we can reach a wider audience and everyone can get to know the Symphony of the Kootenays better. Well, today we have two very special guests. These two worked very closely together to make our percussion section run smoothly. We have Sven Heyde from Kimberley. Hi, Sven. How are you doing?
I'm well, thanks.
And we're also joined by Robin Clegg from Creston. How are you doing, Robin?
I'm great. Jeff, how are you today?
I'm doing great, and it's so nice to see you both. So thank you very much for being here, for taking the time to be involved in this program. This is going to be a really exciting one, I know. How have you both been over the past, I keep saying year, but now it's really been about 15 months. Sven, how has it been for you, this strange time we've had?
Yeah, it hasn't been terrible. Trying to do things outside for fun and music-wise, trying to just find new ways to do things that are still interesting and engaging. So it hasn't been terrible.
That's great. And how about for you, Robin? Have you been keeping busy this past funny year?
Yeah, it's actually turned out to be quite interesting. Of course, it forced me to adapt, and I started putting together a little studio in my spare bedroom and got busy into learning how to do all that, and then also working on getting back into composing, which has been a real treat.
That's right. Yeah, you've had quite a lot of experience in the past in doing that. And we're going to maybe hear some fruits of your labor a little bit later today. That's very exciting. So I thought we'd start today's show with a musical selection. Robin, what are we about to hear?
Well, this is the first movement from a selection of Mozart duets. It's actually originally written as a wind duet, and then it was transcribed into a low brass duet, which I had purchased for my students. So I decided to adapt it to a vibraphone duet.
Wow, that's quite the journey this piece has gone through. We're excited to hear it. Here we go. That was fantastic. Well, now we're going to take a moment to speak with Robin Clegg. How are you doing, Robin?
Great. How are you? How is everybody?
I'm doing well, and it's certainly great to see you and get a chance to chat with you. And so just want to get our audiences to know you a little bit better. Can you share with us a little bit about your musical background and your training?
Well, I actually grew up in the Kootenays in Fernie. So I initially, like most percussionists, probably got my start in band. I was a bit of a late bloomer, though. I didn't join band until grade 10, but I guess I had a hidden latent talent that they discovered. I eventually went through percussion and several other instruments in band, and eventually ended up on the tuba, actually. and then auditioned for music schools, and I got into the University of Victoria. I always kept up, as much as I could, my percussion chops. And so I graduated from UVic in 1983, a double major in education and performance.
Nice.
And after that, I headed up to Prince George, believe it or not. It was a combination of a teaching job and a position in the symphony with as principal tuba. But eventually that also morphed into principal percussion and timpani. So it's kind of a triple principal up there for 18 years.
Wow, that's a big job to handle.
Yeah. For a while there, they did hire a percussionist from Nova Scotia, excellent percussionist who ended actually in the Blue Man group. It involved finding lots of good assistant percussion players. And there was actually concerts where I was literally running across back of the stage from timpani to tuba.
Oh, I'll bet. Yeah. I think Prince George and Symphony of the Kootenays probably have quite a lot in common. What sort of similarities do you see between orchestras like the Symphony of the Kootenays and these other ones you've played with?
Well, they both heavily rely on import players. So, for example, in Prince George, we did have a professional corps, but it was very small. It was only like 7 or 8 people. Mm-hmm. And then there were paid, basically, non-core professionals. And then also we had some adult amateur players. But the ranks, and it was mostly the strings, were filled up with people coming up from Vancouver.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And so that's a lot like for us over in the East Kootenays, east side of BC, where we're drawing from the nearest city, which is, of course, Calgary in that area. And so, you were up in Prince George for quite a while. What brought you back to the Kootenays, and how did you get playing with the Symphony of the Kootenays again?
I was just reaching a point where I had a lot of wonderful opportunities up in Prince George. Opportunities that I necessarily wouldn't have had in, say, if I would have stayed on in Victoria or Vancouver Island or even Vancouver. But it was getting to the point where the elements, some of the elements of the town and the isolation was getting a bit to me. And I just decided to take a year off, and I came back to the Kootenays. My mom and dad were going on vacation, so I was just house sitting for a year in Fernie. And I was thinking, I ended up getting quite busy doing a lot of personal gigs because I do other types of gigs as well. I have this cafe, where I sing and play guitar gig. And eventually I moved to Kimberley, and I lived there for quite a few years, and I got phenomenally busy. And that's where I started hooking up with the other orchestras in the interior as well.
And when did you start playing with Symphony of the Kootenays, and how did that all come about?
I was actually visiting a friend up in Invermere, and I noticed there was a poster for the Symphony of the Kootenays, and at that time Bruce Dunn was conducting. And Bruce Dunn and I, our connection goes back many, many years. And so I popped in to catch the concert, and he got talking to Bruce, and he says, well, if you're living here, why aren't you playing with us? In his Bruce way.
And that's how you started. And so did you come into the symphony as a tuba player or as a percussionist, or both?
As a tuba player. And
so now, fast forward a few years, you pretty much exclusively play timpani and other percussion instruments with us. We're going to talk a little bit more about how that all works, but just share with our audience a little bit about the other jobs that you have. Some people might say foolishly taken on, but of course we appreciate everything you do with that for us. Just share with the audience a little bit about what those duties entail.
Well, I guess now we could say I'm officially stage manager of the Symphony of the Kootenays. That came on as I did have experience with that in Prince George as well. And it just seemed, I'm a sort of a person, I like to be really early to rehearsals. And I was always involved with the setup anyway. So I started doing this with, there was assistance, with different people, adults who were volunteers. And then it was decided I guess, through the board and yourself and Ellen, that it become an official position. So I get there early. I helped set up the orchestra. We're very lucky to have Evan Bucher, his students, who bring all the equipment into the hall and help set up too, because it's physically a demanding job to set up an orchestra.
So you work closely with them, and how does that work out from your position?
I've had such a pleasure working with all the kids who, bring the stands and the percussion instruments and the chairs in, and then he also has a couple of students who he probably mentioned in the previous show that help during the concert, which is a super help to me, because once I get to where the rehearsals and the concert starts, I don't want to necessarily have to worry about the managing of the show itself. And they're always so adept, and they handle the job remarkably well.
Yeah, I agree. There's so much that goes on behind the stage. And of course, when you're on stage and you're already having to juggle quite a few things, it's nice to not have to worry about the non-performance aspect at that time. And of course, you prepared a video that sort of showcases your ability to juggle quite a few instruments. Just tell our audience what we're about to see here.
Well, one of my fortes, if you excuse the pun, in music is I play a lot of instruments. And over the years, I developed a love of world music, and in particular, hand drumming from around the world. And so I've collected over the years a lot of hand drums. And this is just a brief demonstration of some of those drums, explanation of maybe where the drums originate, and materials, that sort of thing.
Awesome. Well, here we go.
Hello, my name is Robin Clegg, and I am principal timpanist and a percussionist with the Symphony of the Kootenays. Today, I would like to give a small demonstration of various hand drums from around the world, some better known, some lesser. I'll start with one of the more common drums that has become popular in the last 25 to 30 years. This, of course, is the djembe. Now, the history of the djembe is generally believed to have been invented around between 400 to 800 years ago, and also generally considered to come from Mali, where the earliest djembe was found. The djembe is made from African hardwood and is covered, with this particular one, with an animal skin, generally found in now most nations of West Africa and of course throughout the world. In the Banana people from Mali, they have a phrase called Ankaje Ankabe, which means people gather together, which is the word from what djembe derived. This is a beautiful drum, my favorite. It's from Ghana and beautifully hand carved with African hardwood. I have a smaller djembe, and this one is actually made on the Heyde by a gentleman there. I picked this one up while I was performing at the Smithers Folk Festival many years ago. And being smaller, of course, it has a much higher ring to it. I'm now going to turn to the family of goblet drums. Goblet drums are found mostly in North Africa, the Middle East, and Turkey. And depending on what region they come from, they can be called either a darbuka, or a doumbek, or a doumbelek. There are other names as well. And can be made from either wood, porcelain, or metal. You find the metal ones most commonly in Turkey. Now, having a much higher pitch to it allows it to be played differently with the fingers as well as the hands. The next family of drums is probably the oldest and is found most common in nearly every culture in the world, and that is the frame drum. This particular design, this one's quite large of course, can be found everywhere in the Africa, the Middle East, Europe. There's a Japanese frame drum, which is very similar to this one. And of course, other instruments have come from it too. We know that the First Nations in North and South America, they also have their ceremonial drums. And they also became smaller eventually. In the Renaissance, they were called a tabor, and eventually had jingles put on them. And of course, that became the tambourine. I can also place my hand in the middle to mute it a little bit. And the different pitches you hear as I'm pressing on the membrane, and that's raising the pitch. If I lessen the pressure, it lowers the pitch. I mentioned the First Nations, of course, have the drums. I was gifted with this beautiful hand-painted drum. And this is from the Turner Valley Black Diamond area of southwest Alberta. Of course, you have the Blackfoot, the Stony, I'm sorry, there's two others. And I don't use this one for playing so much as it's a beautiful drum. And it's like a work of art to me. Going back to Africa, now this will be one of the lesser known drums. This drum is found all over and it has various names depending upon which region and language. And more commonly it's just called a tribal drum, and it would have been used in a lot of ceremonial work. Now what's interesting about this drum is it's made completely from animal. You've got the skin, well the hide, skin, and even tendons as the strings. And it would have been played similar to a talking drum, which is a curved mallet, which I don't have, but I'll use this. And you can hear it. And I can change the pitch by pressing on the head. I'd like to end off with the Latin American drums, and these of course are very well known, and they are the congas and the bongos. So there is a brief introduction to the some of the hand drums known around the world. Thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you in person eventually when we are allowed to do live concerts again.
All right, that was very interesting. Now we're going to speak with Sven Heyde. It's always a busy time when we're in the same room, and the two of us are usually crossing paths and just get to say, hey, how's it going? So I'm really curious to get to know you better and hear more about your musical background. I'm sure many of our listeners are very familiar with your history, but for those who aren't, tell us a little bit about where you trained and how you came to be where you are today.
Sure, yeah. So a bit of a roundabout journey, I guess. I left high school planning to become a high school band teacher one day, and so went to Grant MacEwan, which was Grant MacEwan College then in Edmonton, and did a performance diploma there. At which point I was planning on being a rock star, and then I sort of left music entirely for a few years, and I did a Bachelor of Arts in the Humanities, and then did a teaching degree. because my wife was doing one and I didn't know what else to do, and had nothing to do for the year. And so I figured I'd join her and do a teaching degree. And yeah, sort of a circuitous journey there. I didn't really know what I wanted to do in that, and then realized as that year went on that there were a lot of job opportunities for music. And I started thinking, and I hadn't really done a lot of music in a while at that point, and sort of started to reorient my head and yeah, sort of in that direction. And then as job postings started coming up, I realized that music was an option for me. And so that was really neat to kind of head right back to sort of where I'd started from, in terms of my goals and ambitions. And yeah, so I ended up here right out of college. So I teach at Selkirk Secondary, and currently also at McKim Middle School in Kimberley. And as of next year, I'll just be at Selkirk. And yeah, so I run the music program at the high school, and also sort of run like the beginning band stuff at McKim right now.
That must be interesting, because of course it's usually quite a close relationship between middle schools and high schools when it comes to a band. Of course, you got to I'm sure it's been a lot of work to do both, but probably quite seamless, I would imagine.
Yeah, it's sort of, it makes, some pieces means there's just more stuff to juggle, but yeah, for sure. There's those, it just makes, seamless is great. It just makes it easy in some ways to sort of plan ahead for things. And hey, there's no horns this year in band. Let's get a couple beginning horn players and that type of stuff, right? So
you get to plant the seeds, and as well as so you've been now teaching in Kimberley for quite a few years. How have you seen the community change over the years through that lens of being a music teacher in the community?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, I don't know. I think we've seen just sort of more of a general feeling that this is one of the things we do in Kimberley, that there's, that an arts program at the high school, and there's a variety of things, drama or fine arts as well here, that's, one of the things that we do here. And we put on a large musical every year, or we did every year for quite some time. And now it's actually been the longest break I've ever taken from doing musicals here. Right. And we've just begun to make plans for a musical next spring, which is super exciting. And yeah, those, we've had huge community response to those, and great turnout. And so that's really kind of neat. And yeah, I think it just has made it sort of just this piece of sort of who we are, maybe a little bit as a community. And
definitely, yeah, those type of events surely energize the kids. They probably really rally around having that kind of a project. As well, the community, I think, really gets a lot out of coming to see all that hard work, and also they're usually really well done, and so quite entertaining for the community as well.
Thank you. Yeah, no, they're fun for sure. And I think part of the community piece of them is that there's so many different people involved. So that's the time when parents get involved more than they are in the other part of the program, and community musicians are involved. And Robin's come out and done several of our shows, several of our musicals, and that I think one of the reasons it builds that sense of community is because the whole community, or different aspects of the community, get involved in making those productions, which is really kind of neat.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you spoke about, obviously going to college. I think this happens to a lot of us. We get pretty energized about the idea of being a performer when we go to school, and especially a great music school like Grant MacEwan, the jazz program there is world class. You come out of there thinking, yeah, of course I can be a rock star, like you said. And then, of course, we start to realize how important education is, and also not just for the fact that there's lots of employment opportunities there, a little more stable living than living in a van on the road, but also how important it is for the perpetuation of music in our society, and also just seeing the kids. I have to say, I've come in and I get to work with some of your students through them coming to play with us in the symphony, but you've had me in and perform and chat with some of your classes, and I have to say, kids that are in band typically, and certainly I've seen it in Cranbrook and in Kimberley as well, those kids are really engaged in what they're doing. Maybe just speak to a bit about why that is and why that's so important.
Yeah, for sure. No, that's such an interesting point, right? I fell into teaching kind of sideways, but there's nothing I would rather do. It's such a neat, just part of of building future generations and that kind of thing, right? So yeah, that engagement piece is so interesting. We've talked about it especially a lot this year, right? Where we come to band, we come to choir, but we don't do trips and we don't put on big performances. And so like, what is the engagement piece, right? And I think it's just, I like that it's multi-grade typically in music, and it certainly is at Selkirk as well, right? So it's math 10 and it's English 11, but it's senior band, right? With a bunch of grades. And I think that's really a neat way to get to know other kids. And I love that it's always about us, right? So for kids that it's like, well, it's not like, how does my clarinet sound? It's how does my clarinet sound with the tuba? And how are we working together to make this thing, right? And I love how that, like, music is just like a giant metaphor for society, right? Like
it really
the
is.
Brilliant way that it, you know, if it's not happening together, it's not happening at all. It doesn't matter that, you know, we were working on this morning with, we were just practicing some scales from memory, and it's like, okay, here it is at 180 beats a minute. You are allowed to play the wrong notes, but you are not allowed to play at the wrong tempo. Our goal is to make music together, no matter what, right? And we can make mistakes together, and we can make perfection together, but we make it together. And that's like, I mean, that's all music is all the time, right? And
yeah, and it's funny because bands certainly get this image sometimes of being, well, you know, like, oh, the band, and you don't always have people that are necessarily in band that are going to become professional musicians. And I think people miss the point of band and programs like this, and that you're right. It's about learning to work together, and it's okay to make mistakes, and it's okay to know that, you know, the most important thing is striving to be together and create something together. That's really important. So, of course, that then bleeds into, you know, what kind of people our community is adopting. Like, what kind of adults are growing up out of these programs, and how are they contributing to our community? You perform a lot in the East Kootenays. You know, I've seen you, you know, performing with your jazz ensemble, other type of things like that. In fact, I think one of the first times we even really met in any meaningful way was not at Symphony of the Kootenays, but actually performing on a glacier up in Invermere. You've played in pretty big programs. How would you say the East Kootenay music scene is, as far as, you know, the vibrancy of it and the uniqueness of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a brilliant scene. I love the, you know, there's a close knitness for sure. Like you've played with everybody at some point or other, right? And you know, I don't know, it's neat. Like, you know, when I bring my students out to the symphony, and Will Huxtable or Chris Stadel are working at the theater, and I'll say to my students, hey, this is my old friend Will, who I've played in a band with, and this is my old friend Chris, who I've also played in a band with, and just this neat, like, these histories that go way back and are hopefully going to go way forward, and just connect ourselves. And like you said, like, you know, our first time working together was both performing under someone else, and now I, you know, work with you at the symphony, which I love doing, and yeah, I just love the way that those connections carry on. And I think the East Kootenay music scene is brilliant. There's, you know, like the Hideout does regular or has done regular evenings. My jazz ensemble does one of those nights, but they host tons of other ensembles there, and venues like the Stage Door in Cranbrook and Center 64 in Kimberley that bring in, you know, put together programs, and they bring in artists, or local artists will do that kind of thing. And all the way back to like when we were teenagers, and people I would know would rent out, you know, a hall and have their punk band perform with some other punk band, and a bunch of teenagers got together and listened to punk music. And, you know, and that's like part of the music scene too. It's brilliant.
All right. So you've prepared a short piece for us today. What are we about to hear?
This is John S. Pratt's Drum Corps on Parade, from a book called 14 Modern Contest Solos. And so it's a piece that that features a bunch of different marching band rudiments. So you'll hear the sort of really tight, hopefully tight, double stroke marching roll, as opposed to the soft orchestral buzz roll. And you'll hear a lot of flam rudiments, paradiddles. So in some way, it's almost an exercise turned into a performance, with a variety of different drum rudiments featured throughout. So John S. Pratt, Drum Corps on Parade.
Very cool. Here we go. Oh, that was wonderful. So we're going to now speak with both our guests a little bit about, learning about what is involved in running a percussion section. I get like the bird's eye view from standing on the podium. Anytime I look back, I rarely see either of these two gentlemen just sitting on their hands. They are probably a couple of the busiest musician performers on stage. Robin, you have a lot of organizing behind the scenes, as we talked about earlier, getting things ready for a show. But, what is it like on stage when you guys have to manage so much stuff in a concert?
Well, sometimes part of the first rehearsal is simply getting the instruments in the right place. So if we've got a lot of instruments, and sometimes there can be upwards of 20 percussion instruments, is having the basically the choreography down to be able to move smoothly from one to another and not be bumping into each other or knocking instruments over.
And who makes those decisions? I mean, are these things that are like written into your music, or is this something that you need to take time to, figure out ahead of time? Like Sven, how does that work? How does that communication piece happen?
Yeah, it's the latter. So it typically starts with Robin and I making a list of all the instruments that are needed, and then cross-referencing that to a list of who's playing what throughout the show. And then from there, we'll start to build out a bit of a stage setup of what can go where, who needs to be able to reach things. Do we need just more than one of the same instrument to make it possible, or things like that. And so, yeah, we'll typically work from sort of, what's needed, who's playing what, and then how where's it going to sit, that kind of thing.
Right. And so there's a lot of that like on stage performance thing, but even just getting the instruments into the hall is sometimes quite an ordeal. Robin, what's the process there? I mean, this can sometimes take days or even weeks to get organized. What's your process for getting all the instruments in the right places?
First of all, it starts out once with Sven said, what instruments do we need? But then we'll go back and forth of who has what. And sometimes who has the best of what, and then who's going to bring what. And in the case of when we need large percussion sections, it requires both Sven and I to be there early to not only load the instruments into the hall, but to set them up.
Right. And so, very often we have yourselves, as well as at least a few students on stage. Sometimes we'll bring in another player from another community. How do the roles work, Sven, when it comes to decide who's playing what part, and who needs to run to which location at which time? Like who makes those ultimate decisions?
Yeah. Robin and I typically make them together. So it depends on the program. So if Robin is on timpani for the whole program, then more of that, I might run those decisions by Robin, but I'll typically often just end up kind of making more of them. Whereas if we're both playing, then it's going to be more of a dialogue or whatever. And so yeah, it's going to be sort of a back and forth based on who's best at what. Often, we tend to have different strengths as percussionists, and that's true of almost all percussionists, partly just because the instrument is so varied and there's so much stuff, right? Is it timpani or is it drum set or snare drum or mallets? Are such specialties that typically any percussionist you meet will really feel stronger in one area, and so it makes sense to feature them when that music comes.
Mm-hmm. And it seems like the communication piece works really well most of the time. I think that's a big part in how I try to run the orchestra from my position as well, is knowing that I don't know as much about playing flute as our flute player does. Same thing goes with percussion. And it seems like you guys are really, really good and flexible about, knowing who's got what strengths and just letting them run their own department, so to speak. Now, just speaking a little bit about the student element, Sven, very often we have two, sometimes more. So, of course, with all those different people involved and all those different people to manage, Sven, very often we have at least one, often more students involved that come down from your program to join us. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about how that came about and how that works, and how you see that the importance of that fitting in with what we do?
Yeah, no, I think that's brilliant. And I love the opportunity to connect the teaching piece with the performing piece. So yeah, as you said, we'll often have some of my students perform in the percussion section, or other occasions we'll have some of Evan Buchert's students join us. And yeah, it's a brilliant opportunity for me to get a chance to work with my own percussion students and give them sort of an extra challenge if they're ready for that. And so it's brilliant because it pays dividends back into my program, because, you know, after a student has done that a couple of times, I'll notice their playing just go through the roof, which is brilliant to see back home in our band room. But I just love, you know, being able to put them in that situation, and then they're working with some great players over the weekend. And, you know, whatever, like Robin might say, hey, here's let's talk about triangle technique for a minute, or some of the other players we have, like Mark Vantal, who comes out often to play, and those guys are just brilliant instructors and working with the students and developing their technique. And I think that the fact that exists is just brilliant. I love that these students get an opportunity to work with these adults and to see this process from behind the stage. And I have a former student named Gwen Davies, who I remember. So Gwen used to work with the symphony, and Jeff, when the orchestra would tune, they would just like stare up at the heavens like, this is such an incredible sound to be a part of. And it was such a neat piece to be able to invite somebody into and to get them to see. And you know, hopefully it gets kids just into orchestral music a little bit and loving some orchestral music. And I think that's brilliant. So
yeah, it's wonderful. Robin, how about for you? I mean, you play with several different orchestras around, and I haven't seen this sort of integration of students on a regular basis in many of the other orchestras. How do you feel that like works in compared to, you know, say orchestras that just stay exclusively professional?
Well, I've always, I have an education background as well. And I've always firmly believed that orchestras like ours are in a unique position to provide students with these experiences. Whereas other orchestras might have either a full complement of professional players, or like we were talking about Prince George earlier, they have the odd students in different sections come and play with them. But I would say by far, we have the best opportunity to give these students that opportunity and that experience. And using the symphony not only as a performance tool, but as an educational tool as well.
Mm-hmm, for sure. And I think that, you know, at least from my perspective, you guys always pull it together. It's amazing. Like probably one of the busiest sections as far as juggling is concerned. And I always say, you know, if you need something done, give it to someone who's busy. I think that can be just as well applied. If you want something done, give it to a percussionist. And it happens. You guys manage these students. Of course, they're great kids. They're not like they need that much wrangling, but you know, I look up on Friday at 4:05 at some of the faces that are staring back at me, and they're sometimes pretty nervous, right? This is the real deal. And by Saturday afternoon, they're not even looking at me anymore. They know what they're doing. Their heads are down. They're doing the work, and the product is always there. It's great. I'm just curious to know, you know, when maybe, you know, obviously things need to change, right, on the fly. Maybe Friday night at 9:30, somebody's just not hitting that triangle at the right time. How does that work to make those type of decisions, Sven? When you just can see someone's not able to manage that particular piece.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I mean, similar to how it happens in the band room, I guess, right? Like, you know, we are there for learning opportunities, and that's what we're doing, and then we're also there to create a product that we can all be proud of, right? And so, you know, I think realizing for everybody that we're on a journey and we're taking steps, and we're saying, well, you know, where are you on this journey, and are we feeling super confident about this part, or should we just shuffle things around? And, you know, maybe, you know, sometimes I'll even switch parts with a student. Maybe there's times where I'm playing a simpler part to support a student who's got an opportunity to play something a little bit more challenging, and, you know, and maybe we might just do that backwards then instead or something, or but yeah, I think generally speaking, like, well, I mean, both kids and adults are able to understand that quite well if it's put well. Like, you know, we're trying to work together for a product, and maybe this is the best way to make that possible at this point, or whatever.
And what a great way to teach these kids at such a young age that it's okay to not be perfect, and it's okay to just say, yeah, I need someone's help on this, or really what matters is the product. And I think anyone would feel better about being able to ask for help than just kind of not be able to hack it and feel guilty about that. So I think that's a great learning opportunity as well. Well, we have a few musical selections that the two of you have prepared. I believe we're going to start with another piece by Mozart. Robin, what is this? What is this second selection going to be?
This is the second movement of the two wind duets. It's a slower movement, and not too much to say about it. I think Sven's part is a little more involved in this one, which pleased me to no end.
All right, here we go. That was wonderful. Now we're going to hear quite a different work. Sven, what are we about to hear now?
Yeah, so this is Clang Clack by a guy named Matt Curley. And when Robin and I were conceiving of this program, Robin did most of the actual selection, and the discussion was sort of around like, what do we want to show people about percussion? And I think for me, I always want to show off like how much different stuff there is, for one thing, otherwise it all ends up kind of sounding the same. And so Clang Clack is a piece that's written for any combination of instruments. And so we decided to do it as a stomp style piece with found or non-typical percussion instruments. So you're going to hear a quartet performed on things like pots and pans and an overturned water cooler and things like that.
Very exciting. Here we go. Well, that was really interesting. Very cool. So, Robin, we have one final selection that you've prepared for us today, and this is a special one. You want to tell us about that?
Yeah, it was quite a coincidence. Just a few days actually before you asked me to be a part of the show, is I decided to do something I've been meaning to do. Sven will know this. I mentioned it years ago about I would want to write a percussion ensemble piece. And lo and behold, you asked you wanted to feature the percussion section. I said, well, no better time to finish a piece like that. So I think it was my fastest composition that I've ever done. But at times it just kept growing and growing. And it went from originally four to four instruments. I think, but Sven, there's eight or nine.
Nine sounds right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I had 9 different instruments, but broken up. So there's never all 9 instruments at once. The title is Lazy, Crazy, Hazy, and it comes from the format of the piece. So it starts off with this jazz feel, which is, you just sit back and groove to it, and then goes into a snare drum duet. I'll call it a battle, and that's the crazy part. And then right at the end, there's a tag, and it's just dreamy vibraphone and chimes, and that's the hazy. So lazy, crazy, hazy.
Very nice. Here we go. Well, that was incredible. Thank you, Robin, for doing. I want to just take a moment to thank you both again for being involved and taking the time to put those great musical videos together.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Well, that was really engaging. If you want to get to know more of our symphony musicians, do check out our other videos that are on the Symphony of the Kootenays YouTube channel. For a listing of past and future episodes, go to our website, sotk.ca, to find out more information about the orchestra. On June 5th, I'll be joined by past soloists Natasha Hall of Nelson on violin, as well as Amy Zanroso of Castlegar on piano, to discuss what it's like to perform as a soloist with the Symphony of the Kootenays. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like this video. As well, share it with your friends so we can reach a wider audience. Also, click that link below to join us in our Zoom conversation that'll be starting shortly. Thanks for tuning in tonight, and we'll see you next time in the green room.